Just transition basically refers to the idea that we need to transition to sustainable forms of production and do so in a way that secures the livelihoods of workers who find themselves in industries such as fossil fuels or logging. The idea being that green energy isn't only necessary for both people and planet, but can also be a source of economic boom. So that's the idea, but how do we make that actually happen? Well, Bill Moyer from the Backbone campaign may have figured it out, using an already existing but lagging rail infrastructure and infusing it with profit for both people and planet. Take a look.
The idea came out of initially a lot of the work in the Pacific Northwest against turning this region into a fossil fuel corridor to Asia. We realized that Warren Buffett, the benevolent billionaire that people, are many people are fans of, is actually the owner of BNSF Railroad. It occurred to us that we should be using that leverage, that mismatch between what Mr. Buffett is, his public persona, and what he's actually doing. So we started working on that, but then we were approached by some railroad workers who said, "Hey, you're not the only ones who have issues with BNSF Railroad and Mr. Buffett." And that was the beginning of a process of learning about rail in general. We learned about railroad workers' conditions and the reality that since the interstate highway system, roadway system in the US was created, it was the freight and passenger traffic fled the rails and moved on to cars and trucks. That created a huge dependence upon railroads on the product that would ship all year long, only on the trains, and that was coal. So that created this long-standing relationship and dependence, really, on the railroad companies and coal. So that was part of it. The second thing that was really a key moment is one of the guys in labor who'd actually been arguing for the coal ports in the Pacific Northwest, sort of on the opposite side of the issues. He said, "Well, after a long conversation, he said, 'Well, Bill, maybe your team can green this corridor paper that we had done in 2008.'" I thought that's a pretty cool challenge, to be given a paper that the railroad labor folks did, uh, you know, a, 8 years ago or whatever, and at that point it was less than that, but they and said, "Hey, here's a challenge. You're serious about you environmentalists are serious about this thing and being in solidarity with railroad workers. You really want to do a real alternative." We weren't using the word just transition yet at that point, but that's really what we're talking about. Um, he said, "Okay, do green this," and so we took that challenge seriously. I think that's a very important opportunity, and I started reaching out to railroad experts around the country.
So, with regard to this idea of the solutionary rail, is this something that people can take into their own communities? Because the rail thing in the U.S., I mean, Europeans oftentimes joke about how horrible the U.S. rail system is, and like you said, it's not really used for passengers that much anymore. Is this something that can then translate from the Pacific Northwest to other communities across the country?
Yeah, and actually, as much as we are focused on the particular Northern Corridor aspect, in all likelihood, this will have to manifest. Not There will have to be a national effort to manifest this. In that, once one railroad company and one corridor gets the advantages of electrification, uh, the other railroad companies would want to also share in those benefits. One of the differences between U.S. and other railroad systems is that our right-of-ways, the land and the railroads themselves, are privately owned for the most part. Uh, that means that those companies are less apt to make the investment in the infrastructure that's needed, even despite the fact that they could eventually gain from the efficiencies that are inherent in something like rail electrification. we're overcoming these obstacles by proposing that the infrastructure not be privately invested, it not be privately owned, that it be publicly owned, that we have a basically over the private right of way, we have a public belt, a public infrastructure that is financed, run, and owned by the public. And in doing that, we also create the potential for having public benefit mandates. So all the electricity that flows into those lines needs to be from renewable sources. The for the safety of the community and the welfare of the workers, that there can be no one crew train. There need to be minimum crew sizes for safety and well-being. That the communities need to be served who have not been served because railroads have abandoned all schedules.
So, with regards to the economics of it, and I know that this can get very, very like deep
Wonky.
into it and wonky, but as simply as you possibly can, explain how you could get somebody like a Warren Buffett, how you could get these private entities to work within this public sphere, and how you can also get politicians who we know are incredibly stingy when it comes to things like renewable energy, how you can
Right.
get both of these parties to agree on something like the Solutionary Rail.
Yeah. Well, two things. It is in the interest of the railroad companies because right now their business model is failing. There's a bust and boom cycle, and they're in a bust in terms of both coal and crude oils by rail. There are public reasons for that, regulatory and safety reasons for that, and there's just economic reasons for that. Politicians don't do anything unless they are absolutely their survival depends upon it. So we're not treating this as, oh, please BNSF do this, or oh, please politicians do this. We're starting at the grassroots and building up. That's why I'm really excited about this as an alliance building project too, because we've been already building relationships with between environmentalists and labor, railroad labor, but also refinery workers and other workers. The Washington State Labor Council just passed a resolution in support of the Solutionary Rail project. But we really do believe that it has to come from the bottom up. And that's why Solutionary Rail is working to build that coalition with labor, reaching out to agriculture, municipalities, rural communities, tribes, rural electrical co-ops. It's a fascinating part of U.S. history. In the 30s, there were to get electricity to rural America, they created these rural electrical transmission and generation co-ops. So this is a way for us also to to be a catalyst for renewable energy development across these rural corridors. Because right now, rural communities can't get the financing they need or possibly the regulatory approval they need to build out new renewable energy generation because they don't have a customer for the electrons at peak production. So when the wind's really blowing, they don't have a place for all those electrons to go. By giving them a customer through all crisscrossing rural America, all of a sudden we have a place for those electrons to go, and we create a much smarter, more stable grid that deals with the problem of variability in renewable energy.
So you talked a little bit about rural America, and this seems to be like rural America seems to be where the pipelines are going, and where a lot of companies are looking to fracking and logging and things like that. So do you see this rail idea as that? Could it be a catalyst to putting in jobs into the rail system again, which we haven't seen for 100 or some odd years, and pulling them away from the fossil fuel industry?
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is it. This is like people talk about just transition. Like I hear that all the time, but I rarely see what people are actually talking about. Like, we should have youth be putting solar panels on buildings. Yeah, that's great. We want that. But we've been talking about that for at least 12 years. And we need to be talking about way bigger scale infrastructure. So Solutionary Rail is definitely a just transition proposal at a very large infrastructural level. It's not a corporate giveaway. It's a way of returning uh, something of value to the commons. It is a way of creating jobs both not just both, in railroad, in renewable energy production, and then in local regional economies. If you're all of a sudden returning service to rural communities who haven't had it for 50 years, all of a sudden family farms, local industry have a way to get their goods and their people to other communities. So it's, I see it very much as a bioregional infrastructure for bioregional economic stimulus and cultural development. Railroads are a fantastic way for people to be together and to travel and be linked up with each other. So I think there's a huge amount of economic potential, and in Washington State in 1928, we had three times as much rail and 10 times as many people employed in rail. Even then, 15% of it was electrified. So I have full confidence that this isn't Elon Musk. I mean, that's all that stuff's really sexy. This is using existing technology to do what we already know we can do, but just finding a way to have the political will to do it.
For more on the Solutionary Rail project, including write-ups and rundowns that you can use in your community, visit solutionaryrail.org. And to hear more about Bill, Backbone Campaign, and the amazing creative activism that they do, visit backbonecampaign.org.